I want to take some time to talk about forms and how you got to this kind of concept. I think it became a breakthrough concept in terms of your work being seen as really influential. And it's funny because when I remember just kind of looking up forms and I know this is probably not a fun thing, but when there are critiques on your work, you've made it, right? And we're at the point where people have like critiques of form. So form is obviously a really important concept that's kind of traveled because it is so universal, elegant. It allows us to talk about a lot of things in a coherent way. One of the things that I think about in terms of this is that when you go higher levels up, you kind of get to this point where the things you talk about actually impact more things. And I see forms as one of those kind of concepts. So it's one of my favorites. And as someone who's spent a lot of time with what kind of, organizational development in the sector, movement building, all kinds of participation and facilitation spaces, areas of contestation and social change and social movement work. So when I saw this concept of forms, it really, to me, brought together a lot of things, not just those forms, but even identities and, anything that holds a structure together at whatever level, right? So it's the term that I use at Level Live is the one that people always ask me about. So can you tell us, how did you come to this kind of term, this beautiful term?
Absolutely. And actually, you set that up really beautifully, Cyndi, because I'll tell it as a story, that a kind of simplified story where once upon a time, and if you took English classes, back before 1990, you'll remember how we used to treat this term form, which is to say we looked at the shapes and the patterns of literary text. And you might have taken an art history course where that was true too, right? Where you would look at the composition and you would look at the play of light and shadow in a painting, or you would look at in a poem, the meter. And those were the forms of literary text. And then especially in the 1990s, people came along and they were like, that doesn't have enough to do with our social lives, right? That's this kind of focus on just the way that art objects work, but it doesn't help us think about power. It doesn't help us think about, how do we live together better than we do? How do we get social change? And so I'm part of a generation of people who are trying to bring together that earlier work on what literary and artistic forms are with the question of social change and how do we live in societies. And what I thought I could do and started to experiment with was taking that method for understanding how forms are overlaid on top of each other to the ways that we're organized in the social world. So the fact is, all of us, as we go through our lives, have schedules, different kind of temporal patterns that are overlaid, right? So like maybe you take your medicine at a particular time of day, you show up to work at another time of day, you expect to turn on the television at a particular season and find a new episode, right? Our worlds are organized temporally, but then they're also organized by spaces. Like we're all now in this Zoom COVID moment in our own little separate cubbies, right? And we're not in public spaces, but we move in different shapes of spaces, in different patterns of time. And so it was thinking, can I use the same kind of analysis of these different ways that we're shaped all the time in the social world that I learned from reading literature?